So welcome to the latest edition of Forward Thinking, and I am delighted to welcome Melanie Leech, Chief Executive of the BPF, British Property Federation, to have a sort of an informal conversation about all things BPF, the merger with the UKPA, and hopefully delve a little bit more into Melanie and her life and what she does outside of all this very large job that she has. So Melanie, welcome.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
Good to have you. So should we just start with a little bit more information about you in terms of how did you get to be in this position, this role? And so we discussed that you were at Oxford Uni.
Yep.
At St Hugh's, and you studied maths.
I did.
Okay. Why maths?
Why maths? The honest answer is
Yeah.
I was good at it,
Okay.
and enjoyed it.
Okay.
And so it wasn't with anything particular in mind. It was just, as I say, I just thought it would be an interesting thing to study further. So off I went, but had no real idea what I wanted to do after university, except that I think I had a sort of public service bug and gene in me.
Right.
And I was pretty sporty and active in those days, so wanted to do something that would play to those strengths. So actually I think nowadays I probably would have ended up in one of the armed forces.
Right.
But at that time, you know, you couldn't go to sea as a woman in the Navy, you couldn't fight on the front line in the Army, you couldn't fly a plane, a proper plane, in the Air Force. So the options as a woman seemed relatively, well, they were second class, frankly.
Okay. Yeah.
So I ended up in the police force.
Oh wow.
As a constable.
Okay.
So I pounded the streets of London for 4 years
Okay.
as a PC.
Which beat?
I was based at Paddington Green.
Okay.
Which is the station that is right by the Marylebone flyover.
Yeah.
In Paddington, and it's also the place where they house high security prisoners. There's a secure unit within the police station. So that sounds terribly glamorous, but actually what it meant was, if you were unlucky enough that a female terrorist or high security prisoner had been brought in, you would spend your 8 hours shift guarding them, i.e. sitting outside their locked prison cells. So it wasn't actually as glamorous as it sounds, but it was a fascinating first job. Taught me kind of an awful lot about, which I hope I still had those skills to this day and use effectively in this context of reading people, understanding people, being able to quickly make a connection of whatever kind, judge people, size them up rather.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a great career. I did 4 years. Loved a lot of it, found a lot of it really tough as a woman in the Met in the 1980s.
Wow. Well, I can only imagine.
So but that's where I started.
Okay, interesting. I think it's interesting you should say that, because it's almost that formative post-university time where you are still learning about yourself as an individual. A lot of people sort of go straight into a job and they miss out on that exposure to the general public.
Yes.
And you miss out on that sort of, meeting lots and lots of different people, and rather than just going straight into a bubble of work where you're then mixing with the sort of like-minded people.
Yeah.
I think services, police force, for me it was like I went and was a rep. So I was like an overseas rep.
Yeah.
So working overseas for 2 years
Yeah.
and meeting all sorts of different people, and in all sorts of very weird and wonderful and some quite depressing and some very joyful circumstances. But just meeting the general public and going, wow, this is them, and this is how they operate.
Yeah.
And they operate on a completely different level.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen it, so
Absolutely.
it is quite surprising.
Yeah, it teaches you a lot of resilience as well.
Huge amounts, and patience, and I think understanding.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so after the police force, you then.
So I did 4 years, and I was on a sort of fast track promotion scheme, but I hadn't joined to be promoted and to rise up the ranks quickly. I joined because I wanted to be a police officer. So I chose not to take promotion at the time that the scheme said I should.
Right.
Because
that would have been to being a detective?
No,
or?
that would have been to, so the progression was, I think, chief inspector within 8 years. So it would have been sergeant after 2 years, inspector after 5, chief inspector after 8. But it wasn't really, as I say, why I joined or my motivation. So I didn't take the promotion exams thinking, well, that will convince everyone that I'm serious, that I actually want to do the breadth of this job and not just kind of go quickly up the ranks.
Yeah.
But it didn't really make any difference. So after another year, I thought, I've got a decision to make. You know, I either kind of go that route and just, you know, go for promotion, or I stick with being a constable and, you know, keep beavering away in the hope that someone will let me do all these interesting sort of other sort of branches of policing that I'm interested in, or I think actually the balance of, you know, how often I feel really positive about this role and how often it's really, really tough and I find it really hard, you know, where does that judgment lie for me now? And I suppose a bit of as well, you know, am I using all the investment that's been made in my education and all of that to best use? And I put all of those things together and came out with the answer that I should leave the police service and I went into the civil service instead.
Okay.
So I did the civil service exams, got myself onto the civil service fast track programme and made that switch.
So civil service then for a few years?
Yeah, quite a few years. So I started out in what was then Her Majesty's Customs and Excise.
Right.
Of course it's now merged with the Revenue, but it was very proudly separate at that time. My first job was working on the customs controls that would operate at each end of the Channel Tunnel while the tunnel was still being dug.
Right.
So we were trying to figure out how we'd manage all of that, which was really interesting and a sort of soft landing, I suppose. So if you think I'd sort of had quite an academic upbringing, you know, and then gone to do a very practical job for 4 years, coming back to customs rather than going straight into a role in somewhere like the Treasury was probably really good for me because I was working on really practical stuff.
Almost a halfway house?
Exactly,
okay.
exactly. And then I went and did a sort of central finance-y type job. Then I took promotion there and became the civil servant. It turned out I became the civil servant, although I was still very junior, broadly leading the negotiations on the VAT regime for the single market.
Okay.
Because for a variety of reasons, custom was quite a lean department, and for a variety of reasons, the two people above me kind of got cut out of the loop. So I was effectively working direct to the deputy chairman.
Okay, so then I assume you sort of were there for a while, and then did you come on to the BPF? Or
No. So
there
then,
were a few steps before then.
So that was sort of first 4 years in the civil service,
Okay.
at customs in those roles. Then I got the chance to go to the Cabinet Office to run Robin Butler's office when he was Cabinet Secretary and head of the Civil Service. So I went from...
How did you get on with Robin?
He was an amazing person to work for. Again, you know, if you sort of think about sort of formative experiences, probably my second formative experience was working for Robin and watching him work.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the most inspirational person. You know, and both at lots of different levels. I mean, he was terrifyingly smart intellectually, you know, and all the rest of it. But actually, I learnt from him and saw it firsthand the importance of valuing everybody for what they did. You know, he would always have time to stop and say hello to the security guards on the front door, or, you know, the cleaning ladies if they came in when we were still in the office in the evening, and he knew their names. You know, and what that meant to them, seeing that at first hand, you know, just reminded me of the importance and really reinforced me the importance of recognising everybody for the roles they play and what they do and what that can mean to people. And the second thing he taught me was move things on, don't sit on things, because, you know, however busy your day is, you know, it'll be the same tomorrow. So anything you don't do today won't get done, or it will back up a problem that leads into tomorrow. So he said to me once something, you know, to the effect of, you know, I don't mind how well or badly you do something as long as you move it on. You know,
because your pipeline is just going to get more and more full of new stuff tomorrow.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the thing that you haven't done is, the thing that you won't have done is the thing that's hardest.
Yes.
So it's not going to get any easier if you leave it, probably. You know, because we're all great, aren't we, at doing all the little things. I'll just clear that and clear that and clear that, and then I'll get to the thing that I really need to focus on. You know, and lo and behold, that's the thing you don't have time for, and it sits there and sits there. And the longer you leave it, the worse it gets. Not only because you still don't know what to do with it, but because the reason it's difficult is probably because of the external factors that have made it that way, and those things are going to get worse if something's not dealt with.
It's a good lesson.
So so move it on. So get it off your desk, and it doesn't matter. He said, give it to me, not having done anything to it, if you like, but don't sit on it and don't leave it there. And it's a really good lesson, and it teaches you, because I'm a perfectionist, and so, you know, the sort of another subtext of that is, you know, learn when you're under pressure with workload and volume, to think about good enough, not best, because you're not going to do everything the best it can be. You've got to do things good enough so you can move them on and you can get to the next thing. Yeah, and then I came out of there and went to what was then the Department for National Heritage, now DCMS, to be head of arts policy.
Right.
And I was doing that role either side of the 97 election. So I worked for Virginia Bottomley just before the election and Chris Smith when Labour came in 97, which was fascinating. I then went to be head of broadcasting policy for a while, at the time when digital was just starting, so that was quite interesting. Then I went to be a rail regulator for a bit. It's a lot
of variety.
Yeah, well, do you know what, there is no golden thread, there is no coherence. I've just seen interesting jobs and thought, I haven't done that, or that looks really interesting, and been lucky enough to be able to do those things.
Yeah.
So I had my first child during my period in rail regulation, then went to run the Association of Police Authorities. So we now have police and crime commissioners, but we used to have police authorities, which were independent local authorities. They had a national membership association, so that was my first membership association role. Then I went back to the Cabinet Office for a bit as Director of Comms, my second boy, and then I found myself in the Cabinet Office as Director of Comms with no comms expertise or experience, just that was the role that needed doing, frankly. With two small kids, thinking I'm not sure the senior civil service is for me right now, because...
Did you overlap with Alistair Campbell at that time? Or was that
no. This would be, let me think.
He wasn't on the scene?
I think I'm trying to think. It's a really good question, actually. I didn't come across him if he was still there. He might have been.
I'm sure you
because the Director of Comms, it was the comms function in the Cabinet Office was very separate to the number 10 comms function. So I decided that this was probably the time to leave the civil service. So at around about the time I reached that view, the Food and Drink Federation was looking for a new chief executive, and Odgers approached me and I had a conversation and I ended up there, cut a long story short. So for 10 years or so I ran the equivalent to the BPF but for food and drink manufacturing companies, so people like Nestle and Cadbury and Unilever and Mars and all of those folk. And then, 10 years is kind of a decent stretch in my view at an organisation like that. So as my sort of 10 years passed, I kind of started to think, maybe now is the time that both I and the Food and Drink Federation need a change. And around about that time, Odgers came knocking again and said, we've got another one for you. I said, well, British Property Federation, so the BPF is smaller than the Food and Drink Federation was. And of course I knew nothing about property. I'd never worked in a government department related to property really. So I kind of said, well, why would they want me, and why would that work for me? But got sucked into a conversation, and the more I talked to the board members at the time, the more I went through the process, the more I thought, actually, this I like the idea of this, and I think I go back to where I started, which is my roots are in public service and in making a difference. So if you think about the two sort of fundamental things that are most important to our lives, food and drink on the one hand, shelter, the built environment on the other, it felt like it was a kind of natural progression in that way. These are the two things that really matter to people's lives, so why wouldn't you want to run the two associations representing the people that make that happen?
And how long ago was this then? So how long have you been?
This is my 10th year at the BPF.
So 10th year? Ooh.
Yeah.
Begs the question, we'll come on to it in a minute.
I set you up for that one, didn't I?
You have set me up. Well, I opened the door. So I'm interested. So when you were given the BPF role, they must have said, okay, so what are you going to do? How are you going to change it? How are you going to step it up? What initiatives did you have in your mind at that stage that you were going to drive through?
Yeah.
And have they worked out? Because obviously sometimes they do and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
So you meet these immovable barriers sometimes.
Yeah. So there wasn't a change agenda.
Okay.
Either put to me by the board or that I came pre-cooked with, and that's not really my style. My style has always been, I've had to move very quickly, moving around the civil service where you only do jobs for a relatively short space of time to get up to speed on things, but I don't think I've ever gone into a role with a really clear idea particularly in an area I knew nothing about, of change, and that certainly wasn't the mandate the board gave me. So my predecessor had been doing the role for a long time, very successfully.
Okay.
So I think, you know, there was nervousness about what the transition would be like, just because they'd been there for so long. So I came in really with a mandate to make sure that, you know, the organisation remained robust and healthy, but then to sort of, you know, with a licence to sort of take a little bit of time to look around me, get to know people, get to listen to people, understand.
Yep.
And that was very much the message I gave to the team. So before I joined, I came over and spent a day here and had a one-to-one with each member of the team individually, just to kind of try and understand from them, you know, were they worried about someone new coming in? Were they excited by it? What did they see as the opportunities? So I kind of tried to collect up all that knowledge internally from within the team, as well as talking to people in the industry. And of course I joined in January, so within 8 weeks I was at MIPIM for the first time.
Wow.
You know, and I met an awful lot of people then who had lots of views to give to me.
Yeah.
But it was good. I was privileged, I think, to have that space and that opportunity. And what it left me with, you know, sort of a few months in, was a really clear sense of the strengths of the organisation, you know, around all of the policy work we do, the great team that I'd inherited and all the work they did, but also the opportunity to bring some of my kind of values and my, you know, understanding of what the important things are that the industry does to the conversation. So we weren't, for example, doing anything on ED&I, which felt to me like a big gap. My predecessor left and was one of the founders of Real Estate Balance. So, you know, it wasn't that I wanted to sort of start a competitor to that, or, you know, there wasn't a lot of other good stuff going on. But it felt to me that if we were the voice of the industry and we wanted to represent what was important to the industry, we had at least to be talking about ED&I, and we had to, you know, be stressing the importance of it. So we created, one of the early things I did was create our statement of principles. So we just put a stake in the ground and said, this is important to the BPF. We think this is mission critical for the industry, and we have a set of values that we think, you know, we want to stand for, and we want our members to stand for.
I'm interested in how this starts. It's like I'm comparing it to the business.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's like so I have a great idea and I go, okay, so Ed and I, we're not doing very much, we're not very visible. Right, we'll just launch it and then we'll go to the members and say, what do you think? Or do you sit around with sort of key members and go, guys, we're not very strong on this, and maybe we should be a bit more seen, and actually we do have a policy and we should be mandating this through the industry? How does it work? And then how do you then sort of get people to on board, I guess, on the ideas?
So I think it started with the team internally.
Okay.
And it was absolutely.
And it's recognising that you're just you're weak on that, or not. No, not weak, very
but
visible.
Just that I thought it was an important thing we should be talking about and standing for, that we weren't. And say the internal team very much supportive of that. With my board again, you know, very supportive of that. And I think, you know, what we weren't trying to be was a regulator. We weren't trying to kind of lay down rules, because that's not our role as the BPF.
Right. Okay.
And we couldn't police them if we did. So we weren't trying to do that. But what we were trying to do was to articulate a set of values.
So gently
and
guide.
Importance. Well, what we do is to say we've got now got our statement of principles. So that says this is what we think is really important. If you're a member, you know, we expect you to share those values, whether as a company or whether as an individual coming and engaging with us. And we ask members to recommit to that every year when they renew their membership. So and then I suppose, you know, as sometimes happens with these things, events come along that help to drive you further and faster. So we had, you'll remember this, the President's Club dinner, and that hit the headlines, and that really kind of focused minds on values, I think, and about, you know, whether we were a college open to everybody, or we wanted to stand for some things that might mean that we would ultimately be able to say to people, actually, we don't think you share our values, or you've demonstrably not shared our values. You know, those kind of things. So I think that did something to drive that agenda a bit further faster.
So what's the future hold then for the BPF?
Gosh, well, this year is an election year,
Yeah.
And it's a great time to be in a lobbying organisation in
Yes.
an election year when there's a chance of a change of government.
Are you totally happy with what's gone on the last sort of few years then? 10, 12 years, 13 years, or however long it's been?
No, look.
Or would you sort of maybe point the finger and go,
Oh gosh.
could have done better?
So, when I was in Food and Drink, the great Dame Deirdre Hutton was for most of that time the chair of the Food Standards Agency, and she once said to me, sitting there as the regulator, the agency, if no one is totally happy most of the time, you're probably doing your job about right. Now, taking that logic and applying it in a totally contorted way, I think, with a kind of taking my BPF hat on and putting a citizen hat on, I think if the property industry or any industrial sector was totally happy with policy, regulation, then government probably isn't doing its job. Because there are tensions. There are, particularly in somewhere like property where you are fundamental to people's lives, you're fundamental to our lived experiences every day. There's always going to be challenge around what public policy wants that to deliver. And there's always going to be challenge and scrutiny around how much money is it legitimate to make from those activities, that are disruptive to people's lives, that quite often don't benefit the people who've been disrupted, they benefit somebody else. I think all those are all really legitimate questions to ask and challenge. And I think, the conversation around balancing, license to operate, which is how I think of it, with public benefit and public good, that's a conversation in which, as I say, I think probably the analogy does run that nobody's ever going to be totally happy, because we're always going to be challenged to do more for public benefit than might feel reasonable to someone who just wants to make money.
It must be quite difficult to have your BPF hat on, obviously professionally most of the time, but have your personal hat on the other times, and to be able to, are you able to sort of look in from a sort of a civilian point of view and go, that just doesn't seem to make any sense at all?
So I think it's not about how I feel personally. I think there's three bits to it, actually. There's my personal politics, drivers, etc. I think I put those in a box, but what I've always said I said to the BPF board and I said to the Food and Drink Federation board is, if that box gets kind of damaged, if there's something in what I have to do that doesn't sit with me, I will tell you. Okay. And ultimately, if you want me to do that, I may walk away because I can't do that. But that's in a box. Yeah. So there's that box, and then there's the box of what is all my kind of experience in the public sector and my assessment and judgment about the operating environment we're in, whether that's driven by the media or that's driven by the politics of the day, whatever it is. Tell me I need to advise the members, which will be uncomfortable for them quite often. And then there's what do members want me to do? And my job is to kind of give them the best advice about whether that's a smart thing for them to want to do or not, and try and have that conversation with them behind closed doors, and try and also have the conversation with them that balances different interests in different parts of the membership into one place before you open the doors and then go and talk to government and policymakers. Because if you go with a fragmented voice, you've got no influence at all. And if you go with an agenda which is so out of sync with public opinion, with public policy objectives, then you're also on a hiding to nothing, because no one's going to listen to you if you're not attuned to the realities of the world you're in.
The public.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's it's not my personal views about things, but it is, I think, bringing my background, my experience to advise members where I think, the art of the possible is, or the doable is, and what the reality is around some of the things that, in an ideal world, all other things being equal, they would want to achieve. Yeah.
Speaking of sort of, vanguard and bringing us all up into the future and everything else, obviously one of the big legacies, your legacy of your time at the BPF has been the merge with the UK PropTech Association. So how did that come about? Because I'm, as I was saying to you before, I'm a little sceptical, having been doing this for almost 2 decades now, is that it's been a slow old process. And there seem to be lots and lots of barriers, and the main one being is that there's not enough pain, I don't think, within the real estate sort of sector to actually adopt technology on a full-scale basis. Apart from we're talking about the sustainability now, but and then maybe that will begin to come in because the tenants and the occupiers and the customers are actually saying, no, we need this, and maybe that's where it eventually comes from. But the story. Tell me the story.
So, I mean, we've always, the UKPA was only created in my time, so during my time here, so maybe 8 years ago, something like that. And we've always worked closely with them. And seen our agendas as sort of, aligned, complementary, however you want to describe it. We've always kind of known, I think on both sides, the potential was there at some point. But it was actually the very far-sighted UKPA board that put it on the table, because, and that's the right way round, because you don't want, if you're the kind of the big player, you don't want to be going with a takeover agenda, actually. But when someone comes to you and says, we really think, so they were thinking about how to grow the UK PropTech Association. And they were doing a brilliant job, still do a brilliant job, with the tech sector. Really strong support, great events, great activities, great traction with government around tech issues. But, where they saw the growth agenda had to be trying to get more property companies into membership to grow that ambition around bringing the two together. And they said, that's not a sensible strategy for us. Be a much better strategy if we were to talk to the BPF about merging. And as I say, I would never have put it on the table in those terms, but it's absolutely, I thought the right thing to do too. And so, we started the conversation, and, we worked really hard, I think, to articulate why, and to articulate, what the benefits we thought that would bring. Come on to that in a minute, and then we went out and talked, and I spent a lot of time going to the kind of venues that the BPF has never been to meet UKPA members.
I think I was there at least 4 or 5 of those moments.
Just kind of, so they could see I didn't have 2 heads, and I wasn't quite as probably dull and boring as they thought I was. And there were great advocates, people like James Pellett at Great Portland, and many others. There were great advocates within the property sector for it. But we had massive support from the UKPA membership for it. So we merged. So I was going to say, how did the members react to the news then? Obviously they were aware it was maybe happening. But. So I think, my board was really supportive. Right. We obviously didn't need to consult our members in the same way because, we were just incorporating the UKPA within the BPF structure. But all the members we talked to about it, and all the members I now talk to when I go out and talk to them, and I say, we do this now, and they're all really supportive. Good. Now, does that mean I think that all of them really are kind of switched on to the potential of what we want to do within that? Not necessarily, but I don't think I've not heard anybody say it was a bad idea, and a lot of people were really, really strongly supportive, and the vision is to create a better space within which property companies and tech companies can talk to each other, because you were locked in this sort of Groundhog Day of tech companies trying to sell stuff to people, and people and not listening to what people wanted, and property companies going, who is this person? Why are they coming in trying to sell me? Whatever it is, I'm not interested in that, and I'm not going to talk to any more of them. And we have to break through that because, over here you have got need, and over here you've got solutions providers. We've got to create the space within which they can talk to each other. And it's not going to happen overnight, and no one expects it to. No. But realization is one thing, understanding, and then adoption is,
And it's been happening slowly over a period of time, which is great. But the rate of adoption has been slow.
Yeah.
And I still believe there is a long way to go.
And I agree with that, but I think the externalities will help to drive that.
Yeah.
I think about sort of one of the shifts I've seen in my time, which I hope I've played a small part in, and plays to where I came from, coming from fast-moving consumer goods. So it's all about the customer as the individual who can buy your product or not buy your product. Is to think of much more of the industry thinking of our customers as people who use our buildings, and a much more customer-centric, meaning tenant-centric, approach to asset ownership and management, and customers are really tech savvy, and they can tell you sorts of things about your building that if you're not careful, you don't know because of the tech that's freely available. So I think that externality as a driver it's not a burning platform, and it's not necessarily a pain point, but it could become a pain point if you're not smart enough to understand your building better than your tenants.
And like all these things, there are going to be some people that are going to be early adopters, and they are running with it, and they may go wrong on that journey, but at least they're up and they're running. And there are some that are sort of, okay, well, we'll just see how it goes. And there are some that are more, should we say, entrenched in the sort of traditional ways, as like, we're not going to do this. But they will be left behind because, as we were saying, your customers are your occupiers, are your day-to-day workers coming in. And they're going to go, well, I've got all this technology on my phone and I use it in my life. Why isn't it prevalent in my workplace?
Exactly. Or, as a build-to-rent resident, why. And then you've got, I don't know whether we've yet got the first generation of graduates who've gone through their whole university life using AI. But we will have, this year, next year, very sometime soon, so we've got people coming in with skills that they're going to want to use, and they're going to challenge in a way that, has not been the norm. And we've got a generational shift at the top, that feels like, it is coming and
it's
happening,
natural.
and of course it's natural. It's evolutionary. So
it is.
I think it's that rather than pain points. Because the industry's always survived its pain points. If you look at the cycles and however bad it's got, somehow, people expect pain cycles in terms of the economics of development and so on. So I kind of think.
I guess the pain I'm referring to is when the occupiers or the tenant companies are saying, actually, we're not going to go with you, we're going to go with this building because you don't have those facilities or amenities or tech within, or you're not sustainable, or you're not ticking the ESG boxes or whatever it is. That's the pain. And then they will move.
Yes, I think that's right. I think where it will be slower is in revolutionising the development process, beyond kind of BIM or, all those kind of things, because people quite like the traditional way of doing things.
100%. And I think you are beginning to see this now. So with the sort of the whole work from home, so there are potentially, well, having said that, I went to a Biz Now conference 3 days ago, and they were saying that, West End is booming, Canary Wharf, the inquiries are up and everything else. So people are obviously coming back into the office space, which is great. But, primary, super prime is doing really well, really well. And then prime, okay. And then what I would call sort of your tier twos. That's where the pain is, because what do? Do they spend the next 18 months refurbing and come up with something fantastic, or what do they do? Or is it change of use? And that seemed to be that's still a sort of a grey area. But that's the pain I'm talking about, is actually when occupiers are going somewhere else because that building doesn't have those facilities or amenities.
I completely agree.
So I don't know how long we've got. We could be going on for caught up after this conversation. I just wanted to come back because you mentioned when you were at St Hugh's, you were quite sporty, and you were thinking the army or one of the services. So outside of what must be quite a stressful, full-on job, and I understand a lot more about what you actually do day to day, which has been fascinating, is how do you relax apart from walking around the West End?
So I'm a trustee of Land Aid.
Okay.
And I'm also about to become chair of the Council of the University of Essex.
Okay.
So I got involved in the higher education world a few years ago as a member of the council, and now about to take over as chair. And I genuinely find those relaxing because, I mean, Landay's quite close to home, I suppose, with the BPF, but certainly going to Essex, to Colchester or Southend or Loughton, where we have campuses, I find, because it's such a different world, and because the people come from all different kinds of walks of life, I genuinely find, you know, spending a day there as refreshing as spending a day at home. You know, it's just really exciting to be part of, really challenging, stimulating in all sorts of ways, and different, exactly.
But also using your experience and skill sets and
exactly. So there's those things, and then when sort of real sort of downtime, I suppose it's very boring, really. It's kind of
but I think most people's are.
Two dogs, you know.
Well, great. What have you got?
I've got a rescued mongrel terrier of some kind.
Right.
The nearest approximation is a Patter Jack, which is a cross between a Patterdale and a Jack Russell.
Okay, I know what a Jack Russell is.
I've had him about 10 years.
Okay.
And then in lockdown, the older of my two sons decided he wanted a puppy.
Right.
So he bought a Beagleer puppy, and a Beagleer is a cross between a Beagle and a King Charles Cavalier.
Wow.
Which has got a very long pedigree and is a recognised breed, you know, and is very cute to look at, I have to say, very cute to look at. And so we've got the two of them. The puppy is now, three and a half, something like that.
Yeah.
Drives the older one to distraction. They kind of love it. It's a kind of just typical sibling relationship, really. They kind of drive each other mad most of the time.
Sometimes a bit gnarly, but other times they go out and play.
But they're a delight.
Okay.
And just being out in decent weather. I mean, you go out in all weathers with dogs, but being out in decent weather in the countryside. So I live near Horsham, so I live sort of semi-rural, although I can walk into the town centre. So just being in the countryside, you know, watching two dogs running around, enjoying life, listening to the bird, you know, it's just kind of fills the need in me, I guess.
Yeah.
And I've got a garden that at the moment I can't spend nearly enough time in. I have a little bit of help with at the moment.
Right.
But our house was built in the kitchen gardens of an older house that was broken up into units and sold off. So we've got lots of really nicely well-established fruit trees, and people before us were keen gardeners. So I've got a vegetable garden, an enclosed vegetable garden with all sorts of fruit and veg and stuff in it. And when we were in lockdown, the first year of lockdown, my younger son didn't do GCSEs because there weren't any. So to try and sort of keep him kind of interested in having something to do, exactly. We planted, so a lot of the garden is perennials that just looks after themselves, but we planted a whole load of vegetables, the carrots and beans and all those kind of things. So we've kept that habit up. So
we've got one apple tree that every year just creates huge amounts of apples, and then someone said to me, "Why don't you make chutney out of it?" And it was like, brilliant. So I'd made sort of apple crumble and apple pies and tartatan and that sort of stuff, being a bit fancy. And so I started making chutney. Absolutely love it. So now I make about 30 or 40 jars of chutney. And then my wife then said, so if you want to do more sort of pickling, you could sort of pickle some onions. So I've just had delivery of 8 kilos of shallots. So that's what I'm doing on Friday and Saturday this weekend.
That's awesome.
So which is funny. So I did a pilot trial about 6 months ago, and they went within about 3 days. I made 3 pots, and she just went and they'd gone. So yeah.
Yeah. So when I stop working full time, I mean, I will want to keep busy.
Yeah.
But when I stop working full time, I've got a bit more time. I want to learn more about my garden.
Yeah.
So we've got sort of, there's lots of things you could do. We've got, it's totally bounded because it was built, on a plot that was sold by these sort of marvellous 10-foot Victorian walls. We've got a tennis court which needs refurbishing.
Oh wow, okay.
Repurposing, so I can play more tennis, which I'd like to do. But we've got these potting sheds, and I want to kind of probably turn one into a sort of an office in the garden.
Okay. Yeah.
We've got, there's all sorts. So there's lots of projects I want to do on the house that I just haven't got time to do at the moment. So, but not yet.
Fair enough. I can't. That's been brilliant. I've absolutely loved talking to you, finding out more about you, finding out the role and the various issues that you're overcoming day to day. So thank you very much indeed for your time.
No, thank you. It's been really good fun. I've enjoyed it.
Good.
Thanks, Guy.
Good.